All right, we are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Davidson County Sheriff Daron Hall joining us. We've got a caller that waited through the break. Not sure what the question's about, but we'll take it right now, Sheriff, from Vaughn. Vaughn, good morning. Hi, Vaughn.
No, this is Vaughn.
Yeah, Vaughn, go ahead. What's your question, sir?
Well, I wanted to talk with the sheriff about, his, when an inmate comes into his jail and his staff and everything, their restraint policies. The way that black guy, where they kneel down on his chest and then one is on his neck, and they suffocated him. I think this goes on in these jails with these jail guards. Yeah, I mean, does he even go with his staff? You know what I'm saying? The procedures with them, because that's a deadly maneuver, and we've seen it time and time again on TV.
It's a great question. I was going to go there. Of course, the national story coming out of Minneapolis where those 4 officers were fired yesterday. And if you ask me, at some point they're going to be facing criminal charges, but that hasn't happened yet. But you saw the video, right, Sheriff, where they're making an arrest of this individual. They think it's some type of forgery case. And he's on the ground with that officer with his knee on his neck and saying he can't breathe, and he's handcuffed, and they keep going, and he dies. And again, it's just awful. It's just awful. So what about training? Because I think the training guide in Minneapolis, they've already looked at it. Those officers did not follow the procedures the way they should have. And so what about your inmates and your guards as they interact in that way?
Yeah, so I think the question is a really good one. One of the things that will be interesting to watch is the training to subdue a person, whether you're in the streets or whether you're inside the facility, is not pretty, right? I mean, it's difficult, and what I'm saying by that is I've never seen a really good use of force video that makes you feel great because obviously a person who is resisting, then there's force, and that force leads to issues that look usually very bad. And here's the thing, and I think I think you're right. There's going to be criminal charges, as they should be if they were in violation of the policies and so forth. One of the things that I think, years ago, 10, 15 maybe years ago, the whole positional asphyxia, which is basically where a person has the weight of someone else or their own weight and is placed in a position of that clearly can harm them, or in this case, cause death. One of the things that I will be fascinated to learn is how and what they were training to use and do. Doesn't justify the death by any means, but it does change the outcome of what happens to the officers. And again, the man's saying he can't breathe, you need to address that. I mean, when someone's telling you that as an officer, you cannot continue to apply force, let's call it that. But one of the things that happens is that this individual was being trained to subdue a limb, an arm, a leg, and then the other one is to control the body of a person. Then that's going to be the interesting challenge. It doesn't justify what happened. That's not what I'm saying. This is horrible. It looks terrible. It is bad, no matter what. But one of the things that'll be fascinating is how and what was the officers trained to do with certain body parts when you're trying to subdue or to restrain a person. I think the agency has already fired them. That tells me right off the bat they violated their policies.
Right.
And I think that's what should have happened.
Yeah, I wanted to see if you can square with us, policy. And by the way, you're right. I've seen jail extraction video where you have an inmate that won't come out of a cell and you have to send them in to pull him out. And that's rough and tumble, but you have to do it. If they don't come out, that's your job. It doesn't look good, but I understand. Your officers go to the distance they have to get them out. But in terms of just policy, and it doesn't always square with it, and then common damn sense. That's the thing I don't see in this video. And there is going to be more videos released because these officers were wearing body cams. But maybe if there was some resisting, which we have not seen in any of the video yet, but at some point, a guy's cuffed face down on the pavement, says he can't breathe, and for not 1, not 2, not 3, but up to 5 minutes, you're sitting there with your knee on his neck. There is no common sense there. It cannot be justified. And so I don't want to hear about some policy that says, well, yeah, you can. If that's the policy, then that book needs to be tossed. So that's, and I don't understand then, policy. You may make the argument that these officers received lousy training, and then you can go after the training department. But I mean, where the heck is common sense in the handling of cases like this?
Right, and I think there's another part, and it sounds bad. It's hard to even kind of quantify this, but again, I think it was forgery related. I mean, if this had been a person, it doesn't justify. I'm not talking about the death, but what I'm talking about is that had just violently struck people and was a threat to do that again, and you can't get control of him, and whatever the deal is. Then in some ways, the amount of force. I mean, the policy is to use the least amount of force necessary to control the person. I mean, that sounds like a lot of words, but the truth is you need, the ability to control them. But the truth is this person wasn't a threat, as far as I can tell, to anyone. Once you have him on the ground and once you're trying to get him restrained, I just don't see, and again, there's no excuse. The part I was bringing up is it'll be an interesting thing to watch. We have a situation here in Nashville with a Metro police officer that you're well aware of, where the question is going to come down to, was he trained that he can shoot a person who is fleeing, in a way that because they were he was in fear he was going to harm someone else. That's going to be all boils down to in a courtroom. Was the police department training him to do that in that exact situation? All that really means is it doesn't take away the death, which is horrible and bad, but it does change the liability and what happens to the individual in a courtroom. And the same thing here. My position is if they fired these people that quickly, they didn't follow their policies. And so I don't know what they didn't do or did do. I just watched what you guys saw. But I clearly think that they know that they were doing something. The agency, at least, immediately fired, and one of the quickest ones I've seen.
Yeah.
So that tells us something.
Yeah, you're right. Very quickly, the firing. Still, though, no charges. Let's take a call from Scott. Scott, good morning. What's on your mind, Scott?
Yeah. How are you, sir? I just want to say, Sheriff Hall, you're doing an outstanding job. Thank you for keeping your nose clean and not any crazy, shady stuff going on. But for the most police officers are teaching people, and we as a public, we need to tell them thank you when we see them. And a lot of times they get a bad rap from other stuff, but for the most part, National Police are pretty cool.
I agree, and that's true. I mean, the vast majority of officers are not going to do what we saw on that video. And it's good to hear from him on that. And you would agree, same thing with your deputies.
Yeah, and man, Scott, that's what gets lost in this. I mean, the truth is, and I don't know what Scott does for a living or anybody else, but there are bad reporters in the world, and there are bad preachers in the world, and there are bad teachers in the world, and there are bad everything. And law enforcement, because of your authority when you're in that job, clearly needs to be a protected, sacred thing that you're not going to violate the trust of the public. But what I hate to see is it's a tough world. I mean, tough job to be in, tough thing to do, and you signed up to do it, so I understand that. But what I really hate is when we have these episodes that it reflects very poorly. I watched late last night, some of the rioting in Minnesota, and I feel bad about that because we have a person who's dead. That's terrible. We have 4 people who've lost their jobs, which I think were responsible for this. That's why they were fired. But that's not enough. Then people took to the streets, and you get the police firing tear gas because the public's throwing rocks at them when the individuals that they want fired are already fired, and they're acting out at each other. And it's just a really, and so my point is, had you not done anything about it, and had you supported the officers, and then maybe you understand there's some friction, but once you go through those motions, I just hate to see our society get torn apart because most police officers, most sheriff's deputies, most people in law enforcement are really good people doing a very tough job. But when it goes bad, they need to be held accountable. I just hate to see the whole profession be held accountable for the actions of one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. My concern now is that, if there's random acts of violence, as we've seen in the past, targeting officers across the country for no reason. And you're right, they took action. They're still saying now they want to see justice, but the justice process is going to happen. It just takes time. I hated to see the rioting also, and I hope it dies down a bit as they know, hey, that mayor came out in no uncertain terms, as you said, and really took action quickly, quicker than usual, and I think he did the right thing. And maybe had he not, that rioting, Sheriff, would have been worse. Let's go to Ronnie. Ronnie, good morning. Hi, Ronnie.
Good morning.
Morning.
I got a couple questions. I
Sure.
don't believe an officer should put any neck, his leg or anything on a person's neck, because you don't know what kind of problems they may have on their neck. They should do it a better way, and they need to get rid of that part of the rules. Because, if you put some pressure on somebody's neck, you don't know what problems they got. You could kill them like they did, or anything could happen. When somebody says, I can't breathe, he may have a breathing problem and he may not know it. And you put your neck on you put your leg or body part on somebody's neck, you could kill them.
I assume in your manual, say for your deputy sheriff, I mean, there are guidelines and there are holds that they are taught to use under certain circumstances to restrain someone, and they do it as long as they need it to get them under control, maybe till they're handcuffed and no longer a threat, right? I mean, whether that's a headlock or some kind of way of holding their arms, I mean, are there guidelines along those ways that have been tested?
Yeah, and I think Ronnie brings up a good point. I mean, the only thing that would come to mind, and that's not in this case at all, but if the individual was trying to bite you or spit on you, and there was actions of their head, it does not mean you should put your foot on their neck. I completely agree with that. But you're trying to control the body of the person, and if they're resisting. And I haven't seen the videos, so I surely don't want to explain other than the footage on the media. So. I mean, the theory is that you want to get the limbs under control, the arms and legs, because you're trying to restrain them to make the physical arrest. And if they're resisting, that's not an easy task to get their hands behind them and handcuffs on them if they don't want you to do that, especially a grown man. And so sometimes that's where controlling the body of the individual, the torso of the individual, becomes a challenge. And but I don't disagree with Ronnie. I mean, you've got a neck area, you've got other things. You got your weight on a person that also can be very dangerous, and so it'll be really interesting to see, what happens from a not a criminal case. I'm sure that'll go on too, but just as to what the officers claim they were trained to do versus what they did, because they were fired immediately. That tells me that they don't believe they were following their policies, and therefore, that's a credit to the agency, and we'll see how it plays out.
All right, hey, Sheriff, I agree. We're going to take a break. I should say this. I think an awful lot of people out there maybe do view law enforcement as being positive, and they tend to give officers, because the job is so difficult, the benefit of the doubt sometimes, because they're out there and you don't always know all the stresses that lead up to a situation. But in some cases like this one with the video, and there's still going to be more to come, there just can be no excuse. And that's what I'm hearing right now and what we're seeing nationally. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, if you're on hold, more questions and comments for Davidson County Sheriff Daron Hall right after this. Stay with us.